If you were taught in primary school that you put a comma when you need to pause to take a breath, you're probably thinking there's a bit more to it in the way of grammar rules, and you'd be right. I'm going to take you through 7 of the most common grammar rules for when you should be using commas, and hopefully some of this will help. Number 1 then is lists. When you're writing a list, you should use commas between the items in the list, like this. So I went to the shop and bought, and here comes my list, eggs, comma, butter, comma, lemons, comma, flour and sugar. And you don't put a comma before the and after the last item in the list, except in very special circumstances. I'd invited the twins, Max and Sarah, and if you don't put a comma in this sentence, there are 2 guests, Max and Sarah, who are twins. You can see how that works. But with the comma, there are 4 guests because you've got the twins and Max and Sarah. So the comma's sometimes useful for clarifying meaning. Parenthesis, when you add extra information into a sentence but you could remove it without spoiling the grammar, that's a parenthesis. So if I give you an example, Sarah, who loves her shades, came to the party with Max. The bit that's highlighted in purple, who loves her shades, is a parenthesis, and it's separated out of the sentence with commas, just to clarify meaning again. And here's Sarah in her fancy shades to tell us that you can also create parentheses with hyphens or brackets, and those usually give you a more chatty, informal feel to what you're saying. This time it's a matter of style as to how you choose to mark a parenthesis, but that's how you do it with commas. Number 3 is dependent clauses. When you want to establish something before you get to the main business of your verb, you might use a dependent clause and it needs to end with a comma. So there are 3 examples here. Because Max turned the lights down, comma, after the party, comma, when they turn up, comma. All those highlighted bits are dependent clauses and you need a comma before you carry on. And these are the words that are all good for starting dependent clauses. It's not an exhaustive list, there are other ways of creating a dependent clause, but those are good ones to notice, that if a sentence starts with those words, it probably has a dependent clause, and at the end of your dependent clause you need a comma. And here's Max with a little bit of extra information. They're called subordinating conjunctions. Initial adverbs. These work a lot like dependent clauses. So if you want to start a sentence with an adverb or an adverb phrase or a descriptive phrase, end it with a comma. Eventually, comma, she got them back. Pretty much like a dependent clause, those describing phrases need treating the same way. Compound sentences. If you join 2 simple sentences together, and each of those has its own subject and verb, you're making a compound sentence and you'll need a comma before the conjunction. So let's have a look at an example. Max really likes Sarah is a simple sentence. The twins are fond of her too is another one. We put them together. Max really likes Sarah and the twins are fond of her too. That's a compound sentence and you've got a comma before the conjunction and that joins the 2 halves together. And here's Max again with a list of conjunctions that do that. For, and, nor, but, or, yet and so, and you can remember them with the acronym FANBOYS. Sarah seems to think fanboys means something different. Number 6, names in dialogue. Always use a comma with a name when characters speak to each other. So sometimes the comma needs to come before the name. So how does this one work? Comma, Sarah. Max, don't tell me you've forgotten already. Sometimes the comma needs to come after the name. It depends which end of the sentence the name is at. And number 7, punctuating speech. There's always a piece of punctuation before speech marks either open or close. If there isn't anything else obvious to use, like a question mark, use a comma. Max muttered, comma, I'm done with commas. I think she's finished anyway, comma, Sarah said. In both these examples, you've got a reporting clause which tells you something about the characters speaking, and the reporting clause is actually part of the whole sentence. Sarah said doesn't make sense on its own. It needs an object. We need to know what Sarah said. It's part of the sentence. I think she's finished anyway, Sarah said, even though some of that sentence is her words and some of it is the narrator. So you need a comma before the speech marks close that just links it all together and it's grammatically accurate. And I think that's everything. I think that's all 7 rules. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll see if I can answer them.